Oh.
Okay.
Okay, welcome to our special meeting. We did not realize we were muted. Sorry, everyone. So we're gonna go ahead and do the roll call now that everybody can hear.
Commissioner Admin,
Here.
Commissioner Pratt and Commissioner Byers are absent. Commissioner Webster,
Here.
Commissioner Wola,
Here.
Chief Cowan,
Here.
Legal Counsel Matt Paxton,
Here.
and then Board Secretary Amy Oakley.
Thank you, Amy. Now it is time for our public comment. Amy, did you get anyone to send anything in beforehand?
No public comments in advance, but if
Okay.
anyone would like to make a public comment, you can raise your hand. We have one hand raised online.
Okay, Mr. Marin, you've got 3 minutes.
Muted. You're muted.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. My name is David Marin, McKenna resident and past North Shore Fire Commissioner. Tonight you'll be discussing options for raising taxes on the citizens of the North Shore Fire District. I doubt very much if you will address the underlying issue of cost control. I want to be clear that I believe the reason you now need to raise taxes is because you have failed to control spending. I believe your mismanagement has cost the department over $3 million. Worse yet, you have committed the department to millions more in unnecessary spending in the coming years. You do not have a revenue problem, you have a spending problem. NFD is the only entity whose tax bill went up for 2024 for Kenmore taxpayers. NFD tax rate increased by 8%. Every time I speak with you, I let you know, and I will do so again, your job as fire commissioners is to represent the best interests of the citizens and the taxpayers of the district. It's not necessarily the same as accommodating the wants of the firefighters or the Shoreline Department administration. I only have 3 minutes to present information to you, hardly enough time to address such a complex issue. Here are some highlights. 1, you chose to buy out senior firefighters prior to the contract for service with the Shoreline Fire Department. You forced those choosing to buy out to retire before the contract for service was implemented. Then you promoted new battalion chiefs to fill the vacant position. 2 years later, battalion chief ranks still have not been reduced as the contract requires. You gave Shoreline Fire Department over $850,000 in NFD employee benefit funds. As a result, you do not have received interest on those dollars, and the Shoreline has simply pocketed most of the money, as few NFD employees have retired after the employee buyout. You decided to build a new training facility on Station 51 property. Training is the responsibility of the Shoreline Fire Department, not NFD. The cost increase for your contract for service with the Shoreline Fire Department is 15.56% for 2024. Shoreline's increase was only 8.65%. Why is that? The board has chosen to purchase a new heavy rescue truck at a cost of about $1.7 million, in spite of the fact that in the past 20 years, our area has had not even one heavy rescue truck call for service. You made this purchase knowing that union firefighters will demand a 4-person crew on this apparatus. That'll be another $1 million per year. There are more spending concerns, but I don't have time to address them here. You're now discussing a merger with the Shoreline Fire Department. When North Shore Fire Board of Commissioners proposed a district merger with Woodinville Fire Department, Shoreline Fire and their department personnel and the chief opposed the merger. Arguments were that North Shore residents would not lose representation, lose control over the fire department, the service level delivered, and the cost of those services. If the Shoreline Fire Department personnel and North Shore Union members were telling the truth then, I would like to know what has changed now. I urge you to fix the spending problem, regain the confidence of your citizens before you move to raise taxes, or you'll certainly face opposition at the ballot box. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And anyone else have a public comment? I don't see any other hands raised. Amy, did I miss one? Okay. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the approval of the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Now we gotta vote. Everybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Now we're moving on to board discussion and possible action items.
What I'd like to do is I prepared a pretty short PowerPoint for some talking points for discussion. So you can clean that up.
Will that be posted on our site after?
Yeah, it certainly can. So, thank you. So really, tonight, why are we here? I feel like, we're kind of at a fork in the road that has been coming for, in some cases, decades. Whether it's discussion about, mergers or RFAs or whatever, but also our financial situation. So I have some slides to kind of walk through some different talking points for the different things, and really what I'm looking for today is just to have a conversation and discussion about what the options are, any questions you have, or any more data or information that you need to come back and hopefully have a decision at our next meeting on a direction, because in my opinion, we need to do something. What that is up for the board, to decide, and then we can proceed from there. So I'd like to start with our situation. The situation is that our property tax has been limited to about a 1% increase since 2005. Then that's been, I believe, intentional about keeping the property tax low and so forth. But as revenue needs are almost always exceeding 1%, and it's fluctuated a little bit with new construction and growth, 1%, 2%, 3%, it's been in that range. But as revenue needs have increased, and this is not something that has happened over the last couple of years, this is something that's happened for a long time, and really since 2005, so almost 20 years, has been at that 1%. Well, what has happened is that in 2013, we were at $1, but because of the revenue needs and how the fire benefit charge has increased in its portion of the revenue, it's pushed the levy rate down because of AV growth down to about 50 cents, which is where we're at currently. As I said, it's pushed the fire benefit charge up to maintain the revenues needed to sustain the department. And now that percentage is up against that 60%. This is not something that has been created over the last few years. This has been a long time coming.
Would you prefer us to wait till the end for questions or bring up questions and comments as we go?
I'll tell you, how about this? I'll finish this page and then we can talk about any of this.
Sure.
So it's been pushed up against the 60%. The fire benefit charge runs out next year as well. So we have some decisions to make whether or not, if we're going to stay the way we are now, on what this looks like. It's been a long time coming. This has been brought up for what I've been told before I was really privy to what's happened, what's happening in North Shore, by commissioners and by administrative staff of doing a levy rate lid lift, for about a decade. And that's what I'm being told. And so this is not something that hasn't been seen or forecasted or it just hasn't been addressed. And then finally, if we don't do anything, we'll need to likely pull from reserves next year to meet financial obligations. And again, I'm with you on that, but right now I'm just presenting you with what I believe are the facts. What I've done some research on this and so forth, but that's where we're at, right now. Yeah, go ahead.
So my understanding is this is not anything new in terms of, ever since there was a voter passed initiative that limited property tax and just general tax revenue increases to 1% per year. This situation has existed, and so periodically throughout the history of the fire district, ever since that initiative being approved by the legislature, this is just something that periodically happens. Is the relative portion of our revenue stream represented by the tax levy diminishes, the relative percentage that we have to collect by the fire benefit charge increases. Periodically, we have to do a levy lid lift to get back to our statutory $1, in which case we decrease the fire benefit charge. So I don't view this as any kind of a major problem. It's just something that we periodically have to address. And so your question where you mentioned that the fire benefit charge runs out, and I think, are you meaning that the voter authorization
Correct.
hits the end of its period, so we'll have to go back to the voters to reauthorize the fire benefit charge? So,
Correct.
but I don't think either of those situations, the lid lift and the reauthorization of fire benefit charge, those have happened a number of times, and I don't think that represents something that's extraordinary. I think
No.
it's just. That is a situation with the law as it stands and us having these two revenue sources, so I don't see it as a big issue.
Do we go, if we go for both of those, levy lift and reauthorization of the fire benefit charge, same ballot?
No. And actually, I'll talk about that in our next slide. But you're absolutely right. This is most, the departments that aren't on the fire benefit charge have to do a lid lift more often. You know, what has happened here is that we've had the benefit of, unintended, I guess, the benefit of the fire benefit charge of that it is delayed this absolute need because we've been up against that cap for the fire, for the taxes, but the fire benefit charge has slowly gone up to now it's almost a 60-40 split, you know, in the revenue sharing. And so, you know, but most departments they do like a multi-year lid lift, but they have to do that periodically and you're maxed at how long you can do, you know, those lid lifts. So this is absolutely, you're right, this is not something that's abnormal or something that's, you know, catastrophic or anything like that. It's just we're at a point. And is there any more questions? I'll flip to the
I
next
have
slide
one.
because it'll.
Do we know when the last lid lift was done?
Great question. I asked Dawn, give
Okay,
me some historical context on it, and she could not tell, she's only been here for the last, you know, 10, 11 years.
okay,
I looked back at our, when we had a dramatic increase in the, fire levy. And it was in, I wanna say 2003, I should have that, I
okay.
noted that, but, I probably should have included. That.
Okay.
It's been a long, how about this?
It's a
been
long time. Okay,
Nobody can remember, and I looked even through records and all that, and I
Yeah.
couldn't find any documentation of when it was. The only thing I can tell you is looking at the levy collection,
mhm,
it was like a 26.9% increase in the fire tax levy. And the only way that really could occur would be with a lid lift. I
so
can find
about
that
20
date.
years ago.
I can find the date, and that can be one of my questions that I answered.
Okay.
I mean, I think all we have to do is look at the fire. Look at the property tax levy revenue that we receive from the county, and just.
I think
Over
it's
history.
been.
Yeah, that's what I.
18 or 19 years ago.
If you look at the budget document that I prepared, you'll see that it's in there in the historical. And that's the best I can do would be to look at that. 'Cause
Okay.
It's a pretty significant jump, but the only way that really could occur would be with a lid lift.
Okay, thank you.
So I can easily find it, I just don't have it right here.
Sure, no problem.
So the next slide, you know, I'm talking about what it looks like, kind of to your point, you know, what we could do. If we don't, again, we're at a major fork in the road, and I'm gonna talk about the historical context next of like, you know, the mergers, you know, annexations, the history of that, but if we don't pursue, we're at that fork in the road where we need to either stand alone and do a property tax lid lift this year and next year a fire benefit charge reauthorization, or we could look at regionalization and what that looks like, whether it's a merger or an RFA with Shoreline, and I'll talk about what. Thanks, your prize. Oh, was that Josh? Oh, okay, cool.
I think we just announced that Commissioner Pratt has joined the meeting.
So we do a vote this year for the lid lift. We're forced to do a fire benefit charge reauthorization next year. Because it was a 6-year levy or measure. What's that?
Okay.
Yeah, authorization, so we need to reauthorize next year for any future years. Or we can pursue regionalization, whether it's a merger or an RFA with Shoreline. What this would allow is that North Shore would then come on to the fire benefit charge that was reauthorized in 21. You know, and through 2031. And so we wouldn't have to go back, we wouldn't have to do a fire benefit charge reauthorization, we could merge into, if we were on to the Shoreline, the lid lift capacity, that would not be an issue, and we would absorb into the fire benefit charge, the Shoreline's reauthorized.
Okay,
That would just strictly be the merger option, not the RFA, correct? 'Cause
Merger-
RFA starts over, right?
The what's that?
RFA is kind of a new.
It kind of starts over, but it could still be. The interesting thing is a merger would be, and I've got the pros and cons, you know, in a couple more slides. A merger would be a simple majority vote. RFA would be a super majority vote because it would be authorizing the fire benefit charge.
Well, Matt Paxton can be practice on this. I thought it
Okay.
was just a vote of the fire boards.
No, you still, no,
Huh.
you still need a vote. Yeah, there are actually a bunch of different avenues for a merger. But it would take a vote, it needs to be authorized by both boards and then it needs to have a vote. And again, I'll get to the pros and cons because there's definitely a con there,
It's who merges into who
yeah,
votes.
right.
So we would vote if we're merging into Shoreline.
I see, okay.
And I. think-
So, if we were to pursue a regionalization effort, whether it's an RFA or a merger. Again, I would look at doing something in August of this year, which is a special election, stay away from the November election. Especially if we're doing an RFA, it has to have a authorization date of before October 1st. To be authorized for revenue in 2025. So we're kind of up against some compressed timelines on this, whether we're pursuing a lid lift or a regionalization effort. I'll just leave it because that could be either.
Okay.
Excuse me. Oh, there we go. Some of the history. A full merger has been talked about for many decades before I came to Shoreline. In fact, actually, when I was evaluating coming to Shoreline as the fire chief, I actually sat down with the chiefs that were around Shoreline, South Snohomish County Fire, Chief Torpin, I think it was Vandertorn over in Bothell even. And it was even being talked about as I was taking the fire chief position. By early and the end of 2013, Chief Torpin and I started talking, and actually we started including both union presidents and getting very close to formalizing a merger back at that point, or taking it to the board to authorize a merger back in that at that time. However, as we were getting close to that, and the RFA discussion started between North Shore, Bothell, Snow 10, and Woodinville. And Shoreline was left out. And so for about 2.5 years, that moved forward for a bunch of different reasons. I believe it failed. I'm not going to get into the reasons why, but in 2.5 years, I think fatigue was definitely a factor in that. Shortly after it ended, I actually went back to Jim and I'm like, hey, I'm so sorry, I thought I turned it off. I came back to him and I said, I know it's, you're fatigued, but if there's ever, an opportunity again for us to have some conversations, he said, give it a little bit of time. And so we started again talking in 2018, again, started talking, gathered some traction, and then Woodinville asked to be included. I knew what it felt like to be not included, so I was in favor of including it. And then you may recall we had some formalized talks about three-way mergers and what that looked like, and that became complicated. It was soon thereafter that Woodinville and North Shore started to have conversations about a two-way merger, which, as Dave Marin was talking about, that failed. And then in 2021, and then again, we started talking again after that about what we could do. And because of some of the previous history and all that, I believe that was a factor in doing a look for an ILA as opposed to the merger. My feeling is that it's always been something that's been thought about or talked about as far as long-term is getting, a more complete, formalized regionalization together, but there's pros and cons to that and so forth, which I have in the next, few slides. So, and these are just some high level, there's tons of probably other pros and cons. I was trying to pick on the ones that I thought were more poignant or germane to, our conversation tonight. So some of the pros and cons, the advantages of what we're doing now and staying this way is it keeps funding control at the local level and it keeps governance at the local level. Nothing changes with the board or the structure it is now. There are the disadvantages. It is financially and logistically, more efficient than a standalone fire department, but it's not as efficient as it could be with a full merger, or consolidation. We will need to run back-to-back ballot measures, but this is a short-term thing. And as you said, this is not abnormal. This is something but it is back-to-back, ballot measures, which could potentially cause voter fatigue. And then of course, the other looming, situation is what is Bothell going to do? With they have an RFP out right now for administrative services, which may or may not, move to something more, long-term or permanent. That's yet to be determined, but if they are looking at doing something, and again, if we are gonna be making a proposal, and if we're successful, then that makes it even much more complicated than what I'm doing now. And that would, and they may or may not want to do an RFA or merger or something else, down the road. So we may be looking at this regardless, next year or the year after, anyway. So that's any questions about that? Because I'll go to because I talk about mergers and RFAs as well.
Well, the advantages are definitely huge for us. And that's keeping the funding control at local level here.
Yep.
With this board and keeping the governance here. And a merger doesn't allow for that.
A merger doesn't, an RFA, I'll get to.
The RFA has some benefits.
Yeah.
And then especially if you bring the city councils in as part of the governance, which is what a lot of RFAs do.
Yeah.
And then there's still enough local control. So, but merger doesn't allow for that. So that's a huge thing.
I agree. So the next thing I look, why isn't it? Oh, there it goes. Oh, it's got a little animation. Yes. Complete transparency, I was using a different PowerPoint as my base, and I was changing slides, so clearly I had some animations, involved. So you're absolutely right, a merger, well, let me go through all the advantages of this, and we can have a conversation. So a merger would have complete financial, operational, and logistical efficiency. There are savings both in time and resources and money, that could occur. The diversification of the revenues and adoption of the shoreline, fire benefit charge. Increased involvement of the North Shore commissioners in the governance. Instead of just controlling the level of service and the budget and so forth, what's local here to North Shore, there would be a bigger board in a merger. It would immediately go up to 10 positions and through attrition work its way back down. So you'd have more involvement up front, but there is no, as Rick said, there's no guarantee that where those commissioners come in the future, whereas an RFA has that control. It would be at large between the merged departments. It could be all commissioners from Lake Forest Park Kenmore area, or all from Shoreline, or a mix. It would be completely,
Up to the voters.
yeah, flexible, and it would be, again, up to the voters. And it would only require a simple majority vote. The disadvantages, depending on the total financial package, it could increase the overall equivalent levy rate for Lake Forest Park and Kenmore, because right now there's a difference of 13 cents between Shoreline and the North Shore Fire Departments. I did do a very cursory look. If you want me to take a deeper dive, I could do that for our next meeting. If we were to take the current expenses, there would be some financial savings that would occur and some efficiencies, depending on your assumptions. It could be a no increase or a very minor increase in merging the two budgets and so forth. Because again, there are efficiencies and total, like for example, and this would get to the assumptions, the total reserves, would not be necessary as much as to be as high as they are. Again, there's savings and so forth that it could occur. It could, my quick version of this was a little over 2 cents per thousand. So an $800,000 house, that's, $16.
Can you talk about just, how did you come to it would be an increase?
So what I did is I took the existing budget from Shoreline, zeroed out the contribution that North Shore pays Shoreline right now, currently, and then took the AV of North Shore, put that into our spreadsheet, and then redid the numbers to come up with a balanced budget. That's with today's budget. The whether we do this or not, as we move forward, it is very likely that Shoreline's equivalent levy rate and North Shore's will continue to get closer and closer. And one of those reasons is there's a lot more growth going on in the Shoreline area, more than Kenmore and quite a bit more than, say, Lake Forest Park. And so as AV increases more faster in like say Shoreline, that will create more, that will push down the equivalent levy rate faster than North Shore's. So at those numbers so I looked at 2024's budget, not forecasting for 2025 or anything like that. I took a very crude, very quick, very cursory, so I want to make sure that I quantify all that. Depending on the assumptions, it might be no increase, it could be a minor increase, I don't think it's super significant, but it would be either no or a minor increase, you know, depending on the assumptions. Okay. Lake Forest, this is a big one. Lake Forest in a merger, Lake Forest Park and Kimberly residents would not get to vote on the merger. Because it would be the North Shore Fire Department merging into Shoreline. Shoreline voters would merge on that or vote on that, which I don't think that is being very respectful to the voters down here. Because especially if we are looking, especially if it's even a minor increase in the equivalent levy rate, I think that the voters should have a say. So that's definitely a negative. North Shore would no longer exist, but it would be very likely Shoreline would no longer exist either in name, because we would, if we were doing a merger, as you may recall, some of the conversations we had a couple years ago, is that we would likely look at a new name for our new organization. And that can be a deal. There'd be a deal for both sides. You know, but that's something that we've talked about, you know, in some transparency about what it looked like. You know, whether we were going to change our name right now with a contract with North Shore, or if we were going to wait until we had a full merger, or if Bothell ever came on board, or some other entity. And again, I already talked about it, but initially the commissioners would, there'd be a joint 10-person board, and then through attrition, it would reduce down to either 5, or with a vote to increase it to 7, it could be 7 as well. So questions on that? Okay, and then the last
Steve,
one.
I have one question.
Sure.
I want to confirm with a merger of North Shore into Shoreline, it would be the North Shore residents that would be voting, correct?
That's not what I thought it was Shoreline that would be, the Shoreline voters would be voting, because I thought that was one of the.
No, that's what, no, we would be voting to join you.
Okay, well, maybe that's not a disadvantage. I thought that was a big detriment when we were talking about this before, a couple of years ago. About when on the, more than a couple of years ago, when we were talking about the 3-way merger, and then we were talking about 2-way. Of who got to vote on what. Well, if that's the case, then that's not that's still an option then, you know, that would switch to an advantage. I think there's still some disadvantages here that we need to be cognizant of.
So just to clarify though, it is the case that Lake Forest Park and Kenmore residents would vote on the merger.
I didn't think it was, but
That's what
I believe it
but
is. That's what
Matt's saying that that's the way it is, then he's okay, you know, an expert on this, so and then the last one was got the animation again, sorry. I can click and maybe we'll go back. Whoop, sorry, I went too fast. So again, and now on RFA, some of the same advantages occur with a merger, complete financial, operational, logistical efficiencies, diversification of revenues, and adoption of the fire benefit charge. This would involve a complete involvement of North Shore commissioners in the governance of the new organization, and commissioners could represent each of these geographically and specifically if it was defined in the RFA articles, which I would be a proponent of. That way would guarantee not only the representation geographically, but you'd have commissioners representing the different areas with a full vote on the board.
Can you define RFA?
I'm sorry, Regional Fire Authority. I did it in a different slide, but that's I was trying to be careful with them. So I'm really bad with acronyms, so I tried to define it really.
Give us an example of an RFA. Is that Snohomish 10 or?
Yes, South Snohomish County Fire. So South Snohomish County Fire initially, it was a fire district. They were looking at doing something with Linwood, and so they were looking to the future. And so they, instead of just doing a merger, they did an RFA. And now, because they did the RFA, Briar, Mount Lake Terrace have joined that RFA. And now they're looking at Edmonds as well. That's, you know, in process. The advantage is that there's a couple of big advantages. The first is that if, you know, let's put it in our terms, like if we did an RFA and it was passed, then Bothell could absorb and annex into our RFA.
Okay.
with a simple majority and absorb the fire benefit charge, which is that's a pretty big deal for them. So, if you craft the RFA that did one, well, let me go through all the bands and I can talk more candidly. So it would allow for others to join the RFA and the fire benefit charge with a simple majority vote. All voters would vote. The disadvantage, more complicated than merger, because you have to do, it's a different process. Would initially require a supermajority vote because of the fire benefit piece. Depending on the total financial package, again, could be a really minor increase or no increase, again, depending on assumptions. And again, North Shore would no longer exist, neither would Shoreline. So again, I think the big advantages of the RFA is that from a governance standpoint, there would be clearly involvement, that would have representation for Lake Forest Park, Kenmore, Shoreline, in whatever proportion was defined. And then would also allow for, Bothell or other, I don't know, I can't think of anybody else that would want to join, but I don't know, maybe Kirkland or something. Josh can take care of that. But there would be options for something, further, and could absorb into the new RFA fire benefit charge with a simple majority, that's a pretty big deal. And so, while it's more complicated, I think it's probably the best course. If we are to look at regionalization, I think that even though it's more complicated, it's probably the best course, which is kind of weird because it's not what I was thinking I would recommend, off the get-go, because a merger is so much more simpler. But it gives us the best, governance and for options for any future growth if Bothell or somebody else, wanted to join. And I know that's a big deal here. And speaking of Bothell, it's a big deal to Bothell as well, for having that governance. So.
So are we done with the slideshow so we can
Yes.
get back on? Okay.
Yeah, so unless you guys want me to reference any of the slides. Okay,
I don't think
okay,
so.
yeah, want me to let other people back on?
So I do have some questions from Commissioner Byers.
Sure.
And he wants to know, are there a difference in financial impacts of the election costs for a merger versus a fire authority?
No, I don't believe so. Putting it on the ballot is a cost in itself. We also pay for educational, the pamphlet and all that. And because we're talking about the same area of population, I don't believe that there is. I can't swear to that, but I don't believe it is.
Okay. One of his other ones was, is there an
Commissioner?
option? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but on that point, I would note that the formation of regional fire authority does not require review by the boundary review board, whereas a merger does. The boundary review board process, as some of you may remember from when we went through this with Woodinville, does have administrative costs associated with it. So in that respect, it's not massive, but there would be a cost saving from an administrative perspective on that issue.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
So his next question is there an option that does not allow North Shore residents a chance to vote, which would be the merger?
Actually, no, actually.
Oh, that's right.
if-
Okay.
Matt corrected me on that.
Okay. So with the fire authority, how difficult or costly is it to set up commissioner districts?
Okay, so that is an option that I didn't talk about because it is more complicated.
Mhm.
We could do a merger and do a commissioner districts to get that that governance, and that input. I did talk to Brian Snur about that a little bit, and it's a separate process. Matt probably can educate us on this as well, but it's a separate, effort. It makes it more complicated.
Mm.
I don't know, Matt, am I accurate in that?
Yeah, I believe that there would be two separate actions that would need to be taken. I'm not sure the sequencing of that, whether or not it would probably need to be the consolidated board makes that decision to have commissioner districts.
That's my
after the
understanding
merger.
as well, is that it'd be two separate.
I would note, as we talk about this, potential impacts and conflicts of interests among the board. Currently, the conflicts of interest are remote in the sense that there's not a identity, a mutual identification between the two districts. There's just a contract. You guys have announced your interests in shoreline in that respect, and as not a legal concern. These mergers would present potential issues along those lines, or the RFA.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna go to the commissioners. Commissioner Pratt, did you have any questions for Chief Cowan?
No, no questions at the moment.
Thank you. Commissioner Admin?
Sure. Is there anything that drives a particular time frame for this process? The one thing I understand is that, so you're presenting us as there's some options that we could do in lieu of, the default plan would be we do a lid lift and we reauthorize, get our benefit charge reauthorized. That would be kind of the status quo.
Status quo.
If you will.
Yeah.
So, and that would happen this year, right?
So by May, we need to have whatever we're doing
Mhm.
has to be defined and ready to go by May to be
Okay.
on the August election.
Okay,
Which would then take effect for 2024.
Correct. And that becomes especially important too, because the RFA, if we want funding in 2025 for an RFA, we have to have the adoption prior to October 1st.
Of 2024.
Of this year. So
The
that needs to,
RFA has to be
it needs to be formed, that needs to be prior to October 1st is the authorization date for the RFA. Again, our timeline is that we, over the next 2.5 months, we have to have everything, defined. In whatever regard we're going, whatever.
Right.
Again, this is that big fork in the road right now of whether we're gonna stay status quo and look at a lid lift, or we're gonna look for a regionalization effort. We need to do, in my opinion, we need to do one or the other.
mhm,
Again, this has been forecasted for a long time, but we're up against some financial caps that will impact our reserves, more than likely impact our, I can't say for sure, because I don't know what CPI and COLA is gonna be and all that, but would likely impact our reserves to balance the budget next year if we don't do anything.
So one way this could play out would be, we do status quo. And off all the issues their request for proposal for administrative services, which could potentially be with shoreline for essentially chief services.
Administrative, yeah.
Administrative. And then that may develop into something else. I guess the question would be, because we don't necessarily have a sense of like how, I guess what I'm wondering is like, in order to potentially facilitate that, obviously if there was something that happened this year with an RFA, it would make that easier for
For a long-term solution with possibly,
or some subsequent steps to happen.
it would also make it easier in just managing between the North Shore shoreline. Because we would have one budget, one governing board, one set of policies. It gets those financial, logistical, operational efficiencies,
Can I make
Yes,
a
sir.
statement on that, though? I've watched 2.5 years of RFA trying to get passed from previously brought that up. I also did check with the South Snohomish. It took them 2 years to get an RFA put together enough to go to the board. So that's something that I don't think we can push through in 2.5 months, is what my point is. I think we have to stay with the status quo and then open up to negotiations for an RFA. It doesn't preclude us from doing that. But to try and push it through in 2.5 months, I don't think it'll happen, and we'll be fighting all the way through it. I'm just trying to be honest and look
That's
at
why
what our
we're-
citizens need. So I think my way of looking at it, I do believe that we're gonna need a levy lift. And so we go for August for that. That's my thoughts there. But I'm not against RFA. I am against a merger. But I believe an RFA would be good for the region, but I know it's a long process. It has been. South County down in Renton, it went through the same problems.
There's a big difference between what South Charles County Fire did and in South County. We're already together.
Right, we are, but that's,
But they weren't.
yeah,
So an RFA could be a whole lot easier to do. For us, in fact, it would be a lot easier to do. From setting it up standpoint, because we don't have to worry about what contracts we're gonna do, what the salaries are gonna be, you know, blah, blah, you know, all that other stuff. We could, you know, I would say we are in a challenge of certainly of a timeline. But it would certainly be a whole lot easier for us to get the articles and all that developed than anybody else has been through. And it sets us up for, you know, potentially of whatever happens with Bothell. And the follow-up to this is that next year, going to a vote with following the general election and getting validation for next year. I believe Matt can weigh in on this. I believe we need to validate for both. Well, let's just not, I agree with you. I don't really want to talk about merger. I'd rather focus on an RFA because I know that the governance side of the things is probably a deal killer, you know, for that. So Matt, would an RFA need, I believe it needs a validation of a vote, correct?
Yes.
I'm not sure about that. You mean
Okay.
a certain amount of people voting in that election?
Right. The 40% of the last general election, that validation piece, turnout.
I can get back to you on that.
Okay. So, I agree with you that we're against the gun. I still believe we could get it done if we were committed to it. But we need to commit to whatever we're gonna do, we need to commit to it. And that's, you know, whether we're going for a lid lift or not. I'm a little concerned about, you know, we haven't done a lid lift in a long time. We've had good support here in North Shore. But if we do a lid lift this year and a fire benefit charge next year, there's a little bit of voter fatigue in that. You know, a lot of people have come up to me in the last couple of years, you know, and said, you know, and didn't realize that we weren't already merged together. And then when I tell them, no, we're not merged together, we're a contract. Well, why aren't you merged together? And I'm like, because we just haven't done that yet, you know, and it's something, I still thought it was something, even having this conversation tonight, I still thought it was something that was maybe next year, or maybe we'd have more robust conversations later this year or something like that. I didn't think that it was gonna be, you know, in front of us like this, but again, we're at this fork of the road. I felt like we still needed to have a conversation of what our options are. And whether we do it now or look at it in the future. There are some advantages to doing it now. The big disadvantage is that we have a compressed timeline.
Okay, so pause before you guys go. Did you have any other questions, Commissioner?
No,
Okay, I just didn't want us to cut you off and go in a different
sorry about
direction.
no, that's okay.
It was pertinent to what you
Yeah, I
did.
think my main question was just kind of about the different ways that either could or would need to play out from a time standpoint. So one alternative is status quo, lid lift, reauthorize benefit charge. Another is the merger, or another option is the RFA this year, or another option could be the fire benefit charge or lid lift, reauthorize the benefit charge and work on a RFA the following year. That would also be an option.
We could. I'm just telling,
It would just.
things are gonna get even more complicated.
Yeah, it would necessitate those additional ballot measures, but it would also give a longer time frame.
And I feel the same way. It takes, the RFA, make it sound pretty simple, but it's very negotiated and it takes time to get it through. Just I did research on that when we went through the last deals. It was very, I know that you can say we have all the salaries and all that stuff, but you're looking at a regional authority, so there's a lot more to it than just our two fire departments.
And I guess my thought was in bringing up those different alternative timeframes to be that I think that even if the board didn't decide next week that they want to do an RFA this year, it's not like it's closing the door on an RFA.
No.
It's more like just saying we need to, it would give more time for development and process.
And that's my feelings too.
We certainly can. I'm just being blunt in that, you know, there's a lot of ifs, and I don't want to make decisions necessarily on ifs, but I would also be pretty poor in my job if I wasn't looking at potential impacts on what the future, you know, brought. And if again, it's big if Bothell chooses Shoreline for administrative services. It makes it very complicated. I'm gonna be dealing with 3 different board councils. With different budgets, with different, policies and different, it becomes quite complicated. And doing an RFA now also sets up for future. One of the things I could look at doing is to come back next week and look at what it would look like to do an RFA this year and answer the question, is it a go, no go? I don't know what we would, I don't know what we would need to negotiate aside from the governance in an RFA. All of our personnel and all, we're already there. We already have the same union, we have the same contract, we have the same salaries, we have all, those are the biggest pieces of, whether it's a merger or an RFA, of the pieces that are that need to be negotiated. You still have to do the articles and you still have to do, all that work.
Governance.
Right,
Yeah.
but that would be the biggest deal is how much representation is gonna come from North Shore? Or is it gonna be specific to Lake Forest Park and Kenmore versus Shoreliner? Okay,
And that is where it got real sticky last time.
okay, well,
So that's the part.
do 3 and 2.
No, but that isn't, I'm not saying what I would want. I'm just
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
that the politics of it caused a lot of delays
Yeah,
of the governance
Well,
model. So that's.
yeah.
And that's why I'm worried that if we,
So back to the timeframe then. So you're suggesting, so you were asking for direction by like the next meeting, and you're suggesting you could bring back enough information, but what is the deadline that it would have to be? The crafted proposal would have to be on a ballot. Did you say it's in May?
if we wanted to pick up we need to either be in the special election, in my opinion, we need to be in the special election on August or not do it this year. If we're gonna be on the special election in August, then in May, we have to have everything to the county to put on the ballot.
So by the end of May or the beginning of May?
It's mid-May,
Mid-May.
early to mid-May, it's,
So you don't necessarily have to have a direction. You don't necessarily have a deadline of a week that you really have to have this. I mean,
No.
the sooner the better, probably if
Right.
if the decision was to go that way to give you adequate time to prepare. But
my plan is would be, or if you'll, give me the latitude and luxury is to say. Brian or Matt, whoever, do you have a boilerplate RFA articles? That we could start with, and develop, and if there was something that we didn't have to create from scratch. That we could use somebody else's RFA, I don't know how hard it would be, I've never been through it. Full transparency, I've never been through an RFA. I've sat in and watched some of the dealings. I actually attended a lot of the meetings for the 4-way RFA between North Shore, Bothell, Snow 10 and Woodinville. That frankly, I believe that one of the reasons why it imploded was, first of all, it was 4 different entities.
Yeah.
That were still trying to negotiate, and a big deal was the capital side of things with a certain entity. Not us, some of those negotiations and it just went on and on and on. And by the time they were getting close to an answer, there's so much fatigue. It just kind of imploded. Again, I was looking from the outside in, and I attended meetings for a good year and a half, trying to stay abreast of the conversations. Again, maybe I'm being completely naive, and maybe you're absolutely right that there's absolutely no way that's gonna be done. But I would think that if we could had a boilerplate RFA articles that we could start from, the biggest piece that I think that we need to negotiate would be the governance, which we get the 2 boards together and get that figured out. And I just don't know, how complicated it has to be. I certainly don't think that we have to make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Right.
It's gonna be complicated, already because it's an RFA. But we dealt with all the stuff that usually hinders. And it's just 2 organizations that again are already operating like one.
Mhm.
So again,
I think it would.
maybe I'm being naive.
I think it would be a lot simpler than that 4-part one. I attended those meetings. That was part of.
Oh, that was very complicated.
Meetings. I think, the failures were, there was too many parties and also different parties were bringing different assets to the table to contribute. So I think that that was a sticking point. I think, only two parties are, already bringing their assets to the table would make it a lot simpler. Seems like maybe what would be a good plan would be, be ready to act to continue with our default assumption of status quo. We're gonna do what we need to do, but remain open-minded to the concept of if it's possible that this could be crafted in a shorter period, and if that does seem feasible, that we, remain open-minded to that possibility. So I mean,
I would like to do a little research on it if it's okay with the board
Mhm.
and come back next week and tell you, yeah. This is not done, this cannot be done in 2.5 months. Or it can be done with 2.5 months and here's a template, or, something that can give you better. I just didn't know how far to go on any of these things without some direction from the board.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to spin my wheels or spend time doing something that wasn't gonna get supported.
Mr. Paxton, do you have an idea how quickly an RFA could be put together without it being completely rushed?
Yeah, I think that one step would be to get some guidance from either our firm or Brian Snur's firm on the different steps that are required. Theoretically, if everything happened as quickly as possible, could we make the deadline in May for the August ballot? Perhaps, but when you look at the steps, I think you'll start getting a sense of, okay, is it possible to negotiate these issues in this amount of time? We typically start from that May deadline, which is the deadline to get ballot measures to the county elections office before that August ballot, and work our way backwards to kind of say, here's how much time you might consider. It doesn't matter to me whether Brian Snur handles that or our firm does. We've kind of associated ourselves. I think Aaron mentioned yesterday. If we did advise on that, we would probably need a conflict waiver just to make sure that you understand that the firms that we would be representing both parties here, and just advising on the process to go through the RFA to form an RFA. But yes, we have advised on, we have checklists, we have kind of standard templates to kind of go through that process for our clients. We customize them so you guys so it's more useful to your particular circumstances. But I think that would be an important step for our next meeting, is to have something like that for the board to consider, so it understands the process and whether it's realistic or not. It does seem like that's a pretty tight timeline, but is it possible? I can't say for sure until I run through that analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Let me work on that
I
and
have-
I'll come back to it.
Another comment too, that I think our city councils will want to be involved in RFA. They'll want to be part of the governance model, and that could cause some negotiation issues. Just to put that in your,
Yeah, that's a good possibility.
yeah, well, it's been brought up to my attention from a couple people on our council, so. They want control, to keep some control, so just
Well,
put that into your work.
Well, the city doesn't have any control right now,
Right,
but you're saying that they would like to be, potentially like to be on.
yeah, if the boards are gonna go away, or however that works, then the city councils want to be involved both in Lake Forest Park and.
Okay,
yeah, I think we have to really look at the different governance model options.
That's.
well, one of the things that is an option with an RFA is the representation on the governance board can be either from commissioners or it can be from city council
The
members.
chances, yeah,
So there is that possibility,
So-
that,
so
it could be
just-
populated either way.
need to kind of look at that, that's part of the negotiation part of it.
So let me work on that and I'll come back with some more information on that at our next meeting.
Like I said,
And-
I've been involved with RFAs before, so I'm trying to.
So did you have any other questions for the chief?
No, I think.
Okay.
Spotting them out as.
Okay, I'm just trying to get everybody
No, I
a
think-
second to talk here,
The whole
so.
point is to have,
Yeah.
again, a robust conversation, and any questions that you have, or more data that you need, that's, I just want to be able to throw out all the different options so that we could have, so we can pick a path.
Right, and then,
Hopefully next week or soon thereafter.
so the only comment that I wanted to make is that most citizens that I talk to already think we're merged. They don't understand the difference
Most people don't.
So I just wanted to point that out, that most people, at least that speak to me, think that we're already merged and I have to explain that that's not the case. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
Um,
If you have any questions outside, after this meeting, before next, please email me. I just want to make sure that I'm addressing all of the questions and or concerns, so that we, again, make the best educated decision that we can.
so I have two other things. I wanted to see if Chief Foster had anything to add to the conversation.
Both.
I don't have anything to add, but thanks.
Thank you. And then did Doug Lozier, who's the union president, have anything he wanted to add?
None at this time, thank you.
Okay, and excuse me, I missed Chief Holkstein, if you wanted to add anything to the conversation.
I do not, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Amy, if you wanted to go over what we have for the next meeting's agenda.
So the next meeting will be a regular meeting, Tuesday, March 5th at 5 p.m. We'll have our standard agenda items as well as updates from the subcommittee on Station 54 on outbuildings, and also the outbuildings at Station 51. There'll be an update on the tax relief for North Shore citizens related to fire benefit charge. There'll be a presentation on the new rescue apparatus and TRT staffing. There'll be planning for 2024 commissioner training and a continued discussion of district finance options for the August 2024 special election.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I would.
Sounds like a long.
Modify, not just on finance, it's more of a strategic discussion on, for this year. Not specifically limited to finances, because we are talking about, potentially regionalization too.
So a discussion of district strategic
Options.
options
Okay.
for the August 2024 special election.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.